Sold. Rachel's voice rang through my phone, dripping with smug satisfaction. 2.4 million for that decrepit old beach house. Not bad for a place that's been collecting dust for years, right, Emma? I gripped my coffee mug so tightly my knuckles turned white. Grandma Rose's beach house, the heart of every childhood summer. The place where we built our most cherished memories, sold. Without my knowledge. Without my consent. You did what? My voice barely rose above a whisper. Oh, don't be dramatic. I could practically hear her rolling her eyes. You never use it. You're always too busy with your oh-so-important legal career in Boston. And as executor of Grandma's estate, I had every right to make the call. I forced a steady breath, years of courtroom experience kicking in. Rachel, that house was left to both of us. You can't just. Actually, I can, she cut in, her tone smug. The paperwork is final. The new owners take possession next week. I'm thinking of using my share for a yacht. David's always wanted one. David. Of course. Her gold-digging husband had his hands in this. I could picture them now, sipping overpriced wine in their oversized mansion, celebrating as they stole my inheritance out from under me. This isn't legal, I said, my voice steely. I never signed anything. Rachel laughed, sharp and dismissive. Check the deed, sis. As executor, I have full authority. Maybe if you'd bothered to show up for more than one estate meeting, you'd know that. But you were always too important for family matters, weren't you? The familiar guilt trip, Rachel's favorite weapon. After Grandma died, she positioned herself as the devoted granddaughter while I drowned myself in work to cope with the loss. I should have seen this coming. I'll fight this, I warned. With what? Your fancy law degree, she mocked. Face it, Emma, you lost. I won. The money's already transferred. It's done. The call ended with a click, leaving me standing in my kitchen, shaking with rage. Memories crash over me. Grandma Rose's laughter on the wraparound porch, the scent of her garden blooming by the sea, the secret reading nook she built just for me. The house wasn't just property. It was the last piece of her. And Rachel had sold it like it was nothing. My phone buzzed again. A text from Rachel. Bitu, clear out your stuff by Friday. New owners plan to gut the place. Don't worry, I already took anything valuable. I stared at the message, something clicking in my mind. Personal items. The study. Grandma's study. The one room she always kept locked. The one she made me promise to check after she was gone. I'd been too buried in my caseload to do it. But now? My fingers trembled as I dialed the only person who might help. Thomas Harrison, Grandma's lawyer for over 30 years. He answered on the second ring. Emma, I've been expecting your call. Rachel sold the beach house, I blurted. She says as executor. Ah. He interrupted, the sound of rustling papers in the background. Yes, I received the notice this morning. Tell me, have you gone through your grandmother's study yet? I froze. No, why? Because your grandmother left very specific instructions about that room. Thomas said carefully, instructions Rachel doesn't know about. Can you meet me this afternoon? A flicker of hope. I can catch the next train to Newport. 2 hours. Perfect. And Emma? Ring the small silver key on the chain. The one your grandmother gave you. I touched the delicate key at my neck, the one I'd worn since her funeral, never knowing why she insisted I keep it. How did you? All in good time, Thomas said. Your grandmother was a careful woman. She knew her granddaughters well, very well indeed. The 2-hour train ride to Newport felt like an eternity. I tried to focus on case files, but my mind kept drifting to Grandma. She'd been sharp as ever until the end, always thinking 5 steps ahead. Her voice echoed in my memory. You have to anticipate, dear, not just the next move, but the next 5. And always have a contingency plan. When I stepped onto the platform, Thomas was waiting. His sharp eyes studied me as I approached. You look just like her, he said. Rose would be proud. Rachel wouldn't agree, I muttered. She thinks I abandoned the family for my career. Thomas snorted. Rachel sees what Rachel wants. Your grandmother understood ambition. She built her empire from nothing after all. But we're not here to discuss Rachel's opinions. We're here to discuss your grandmother's foresight. In his office, behind closed doors, he got straight to the point. Emma, that key you wear, have you ever tried using it? I shook my head. Grandma said I'd know when the time was right. That time is now, Thomas said. Your grandmother came to me 2 years ago, worried about Rachel's entitlement and her flexible relationship with ethics. So she took precautions. What kind of precautions? He slid a thick file toward me. The deed Rachel used to sell the property? It's not the final version. 2 weeks before she passed, your grandmother filed an amended deed. One with very specific conditions about sale and ownership. Conditions Rachel unknowingly violated. My pulse pounded. What happens now? Thomas smiled. That depends on what's in the safe. Your grandmother left explicit instructions that only you could open it, and only after Rachel tried to sell the house without your consent. The weight of Grandma's planning settled over me. She knew. She always knew. Thomas checked his watch. Rachel's at a charity luncheon. If you want to check that safe, now's the time. The drive to the beach house was muscle memory. The moment I stepped inside, the scent of old books and salt air wrapped around me. The study was untouched. Rachel had never cared for Grandma's books or business papers. The key slid smoothly into the hidden safe behind her desk. Inside was a thick envelope, my name written in Grandma's elegant handwriting. The note on the front read, "For Emma, when Rachel shows her true colors. I'm sorry it came to this, my dear, but some lessons must be learned the hard way. All my love, Grandma Rose." Hands trembling, I opened the envelope. My breath caught as I read. With each page, the truth became clearer. By the time I reached the final document, I knew exactly why Thomas had been so certain. I grabbed my phone and dialed. "Did you find it?" Thomas asked. "Yes," I said, gripping the papers. "Call Rachel and her lawyer, emergency meeting, your office. Now." "And the consequences?" he asked. I thought of Rachel's smug voice, her casual betrayal. The house meant nothing to her. But Grandma's lessons, those always came with consequences. "Oh yes," I said, a slow smile forming. It's time Rachel learned Grandma's last lesson about thinking ahead. The afternoon sun slanted through Thomas Harrison's office windows, stretching long shadows across the polished conference table. Spread before me were the documents from Grandma's safe, each page a testament to her foresight, another safeguard against exactly what Rachel had tried to do. The door burst open. Rachel swept in like a storm wrapped in designer fabric, her Hermes bag hitting the table with an impatient thud. David, ever her shadow, followed with his usual smirk, while her lawyer, a nervous-looking young man barely out of law school, hurried to keep up. "This better be important, Emma," Rachel snapped. I was in the middle of planning the yacht club's summer gala. "Oh, it's important," I said evenly. "You might want to sit down." "I'll stand," she shot back, folding her arms. "Just say whatever dramatic thing you need to say so I can get back to my life." Thomas cleared his throat. "Rachel, I really think you should sit down." Something in his tone made her hesitate. After a beat, she sank into a chair, David hovering behind her like a bodyguard. I slid a document across the table. "Let's talk about the beach house sale you just executed." Rachel exhaled sharply. "We've been through this. As executor." "As executor," I cut in, "you had a duty to follow Grandma's wishes to the letter. All of them." Her lawyer adjusted his tie, already flustered. "All relevant documents were reviewed and—" "No," Thomas said sharply, "not all of them. Rose Mitchell filed an amended deed 2 weeks before her death. A deed with very specific conditions." Rachel stiffened. "What conditions?" I held up the document, its official seal glinting in the light. The beach house could only be sold with unanimous agreement from both heirs, you and me. Any unauthorized sale would trigger what Grandma called the character clause. The what? David's hand tightened on Rachel's shoulder. In the event that one granddaughter attempted to sell without the other's consent, Thomas explained, flipping open his copy of the deed, ownership would immediately and irrevocably transfer to the wronged party. Rachel's manicured nails dug into the table. "That's impossible." "I had the deed. I had authority." "You had a preliminary deed," I corrected. "Grandma filed this amendment because she knew you too well." Rachel's gaze snapped to her lawyer. "She can't do that, can she?" The young man scanned the document, his expression shifting from concern to outright panic. "It appears to be legally binding." Rachel's composure cracked. "But I already sold it. The money's been transferred. The papers are signed." Thomas placed another document before her. "The sale is void. The amended deed takes precedence. The moment you attempted the unauthorized sale, The beach house became Emma's. Silence swallowed the room. Rachel had gone pale. No, she whispered. No, this isn't happening. Oh, it gets worse, I said, sliding forward the final document from the safe. Grandma didn't just plan for the beach house. She planned for everything. Rachel's eyes darted across the page. David rayed over her shoulder, his smirk finally gone. The execution of the estate, I continued, was conditional. As executor, you were required to follow ethical guidelines. Trying to sell jointly owned property without consent, that's a breach. Thomas took over, his tone professional but firm. Effective immediately, Rachel, you are removed as executor. That authority now belongs to Emma. Rachel shot to her feet, her chair scraping against the floor. You can't do this to me. I handled everything while she was off playing lawyer in Boston. You tried to steal from me, I said evenly. You ignored Grandma's wishes and tried to sell our family home for a yacht. David's voice was tight with anger. What happens now? I gathered the documents. Now, Rachel hands over all executorship duties. The sale is undone. I'll handle reimbursing the buyers, and you'll both vacate Grandma's estate house within 30 days. Rachel's strangled gasp made her lawyer flinch. That's our home. No, I corrected. It was part of the estate you no longer control. David's protest was cut off by Thomas. As executor, Rachel was allowed to reside there, but she's not executor anymore. Rachel collapsed back into her chair, her eyes shining with unshed tears. Not tears of remorse, tears of frustration, of losing. Why? She whispered. Why would Grandma do this to me? I pulled out a final item from my briefcase, a letter, sealed with Grandma's wax insignia. She left this for you, to be opened only if the character clause was triggered. Rachel's hands trembled as she broke the seal. I knew what it said. There had been a copy in the safe for me too. My dearest Rachel, if you're reading this, then my worst fears have been realized. You've allowed your desire for status and wealth to override your sense of right and wrong. You chose betrayal over trust. I love you, my darling girl, but love does not mean ignoring wrongdoing. This lesson may seem harsh, but it is one you need to learn. The beach house was never just a property, it was a symbol of family, of values. Emma understood that. You, I fear, saw only dollar signs. True wealth isn't measured in yachts or club memberships. It's measured in integrity and the strength of family bonds. Learn from this. It's not too late to be the person I know you can be. All my love. Grandma rose. Rachel crumpled the letter in her fist, tears spilling freely now. This isn't fair, she choked out. I was the good granddaughter. No, I said softly. You were the granddaughter who played the part. There's a difference. Her lawyer cleared his throat. Mrs. Henderson, given these developments, I strongly advise full cooperation. Rachel ignored him, turning to Thomas instead. You knew the whole time and let me go through with the sale anyway. Thomas met her gaze. Your grandmother wanted you to learn, and some lessons can only be taught through consequences. David scoffed. This is theft. We'll fight it. Feel free, Thomas said mildly, but be aware, any legal challenge will trigger a full audit of the estate's finances, including certain questionable withdrawals. Rachel's face went bloodless. David's hand dropped from her shoulder. You have until the end of the month to vacate, I said, standing, and all estate accounts must be transferred to me by the end of the week. Rachel's voice was barely above a whisper. You'll just take everything? No, I gathered my things. I'll manage the estate fairly, but you lost the right to be in charge. She didn't respond, just grabbed her bag and stormed out. David followed, leaving their lawyer behind, looking defeated. I'll send the files over tomorrow, he muttered. And, I'm sorry. I should have done more due diligence. After they left, Thomas poured 2 glasses of scotch, Grandma's favorite. You handled that well, he said. Rose would be proud. I took the glass, suddenly exhausted. She knew, didn't she? She knew exactly how this would play out. Thomas nodded. She was an exceptional judge of character. I exhaled, thinking of the beach house, the overgrown gardens, the memories waiting to be restored. First, I'll fix the beach house. Then, if Rachel lets me, I'll try to fix us. And if she won't, then I'll honor Grandma's wishes anyway. That evening, I parked outside the beach house, watching the sun paint the ocean in gold and pink, the kind of sunset Grandma used to love. My phone buzzed. A text from Rachel. I hope you're happy. You've ruined everything. I looked at the house, at the future waiting to unfold. No, Rach, I whispered. I haven't ruined anything. I saved it. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. As I sorted through years of estate documents in Grandma's main house, the full extent of Rachel's mismanagement became painfully clear. Estate funds had paid for everything from spa retreats to designer shopping sprees, all neatly disguised as property maintenance or administrative expenses. One evening, I sat at Grandma's antique desk, surrounded by bank statements and receipts, when Thomas called. Rachel's lawyer reached out, he said without preamble. She's demanding a formal audit of the estate. I let out a laugh. Does she not realize an audit will expose all her unauthorized spending? I have a feeling David's behind this, Thomas mused. He's been complaining about unfair treatment at the country club. Claims you've mounted some kind of conspiracy against them. Of course he has. I rubbed my temples, a headache brewing. How do we handle this? Let them proceed, he said, amusement creeping into his voice. Your grandmother kept meticulous records. Every legitimate expense documented, every asset accounted for. Rachel's creative accounting won't survive scrutiny. Just then, I heard the crunch of tires on gravel. Through the study window, I saw Rachel's white Mercedes pull up the circular drive. I'll call you back, I told Thomas. My sister's here. Rachel didn't wait for an invitation. She stormed through the front door like she still owned the place, her heels clicking aggressively against the hardwood. We need to talk, she announced, appearing in the doorway. I gestured to the chair across from me. I'm listening. She stayed standing, arms crossed. This has gone far enough, Emma. You've made your point, but this is ridiculous. I'm family, not some employee you can just dismiss. No one's dismissing you, Rachel, but actions have consequences. You tried to sell the beach house without my consent, used estate funds for personal expenses. I was the executor, she snapped. I had every right to be compensated for my time. Compensation is one thing, treating the estate like your personal ATM is another. I pulled out a stack of statements. Designer handbags, spa weekends, David's golf club membership. Those aren't estate expenses, Rachel. She sank into the chair, her composure cracking. What do you want from me? I want you to take responsibility, pay back what you took, accept that you're no longer in charge, and maybe, just maybe, we can salvage something here. Pay it back? She let out a bitter laugh. With what money? David's real estate business is struggling. The country club raised dues again. And now you're kicking us out of this house. We can barely afford our mortgage as it is. For the first time in years, I really looked at my sister. Behind the designer clothes and carefully painted on confidence, I saw something else. Desperation. What happened to you, Rach? I asked softly. When did keeping up appearances become more important than everything else? Her lip trembled. You don't understand. You left. You built your perfect little career in Boston while I stay here, trying to maintain our family standing. Do you know how hard that is? How expensive? No one asked you to do that, I said. Grandma certainly didn't. She cared about family, about integrity, not social status. Easy for you to say. You never cared what people thought. Because Grandma taught us it shouldn't matter. I exhaled, steadying myself. Look, I'll make you a deal. Pay back the estate funds you misuse. Help me restore the beach house instead of trying to sell it, and you can stay here until you and David get back on your feet. She looked up sharply. You do that. After everything. You're still my sister, and I think this is what Grandma would want, giving you a chance to make things right. Rachel was quiet for a long moment, staring at Grandma's portrait above the fireplace. Finally, she sighed. The beach house needs a new roof, and the garden's a mess. I know, but we can fix it, together, if you want. She hesitated, then reached into her designer bag and pulled out a folder. These are estimates I got before I tried to sell it, for repairs and renovations. I thought they'd help with the sale price, but maybe. I took the folder, recognizing it for what it was, an olive branch. Thank you, I said. This is a good start. She smoothed her skirt with shaking hands. I'll talk to David about the money. It might take some time. We can work out a payment plan, I assured her. That's what family does. At the doorway, she paused. Emma? I'm sorry, not just about the beach house. About everything. I got lost somewhere along the way. I know, Ratch, but we can find your way back. Randall believed in second chances, remember. After she left, I called Thomas to update him. A payment plan? He asked skeptically. Are you sure about this? No, I admitted. But I have to try, for Grandma's sake, if nothing else. Well, your grandmother did believe in redemption, he mused, almost as much as she believed in consequences. Just be careful, Emma. People don't change overnight. I know, I'm not letting go of the reins, but maybe, just maybe, this can lead to something better. The next morning, I drove to the beach house early. To my surprise, Rachel's car was already there. She was in the garden, wearing jeans and work gloves, pulling weeds. She looked up as I approached. The roses, she said, pointing to a tangled mass of branches. Grandma's prized roses. They're still alive under there. Just needed some care. I knelt beside her, slipping on my own gloves. Show me what to do. As we worked side by side in the morning sun, I thought about Grandma's letter, about lessons learned the hard way. Maybe this was part of her plan too, not just consequences, but the chance for reconciliation. Rachel hesitated. Emma, there's something else I need to tell you. About some other estate matters. Rachel's revelation about other estate matters sent us down yet another rabbit hole of financial complications. She sat in the garden, dirt still on her gloves, her voice barely above a whisper as she confessed. I invested some of the estate money, she admitted, staring at the ground. David said he had this amazing opportunity. Of course he did. I closed my eyes, already dreading what was coming. How much? 800,000, she whispered, from Grandma's investment accounts. The amount hit me like a physical blow. Tell me you didn't put estate funds into one of David's real estate schemes. Her silence was answer enough. I thought of Grandma, how carefully she'd built her fortune, how meticulously she'd planned for our future. Now her hard work was tied up in whatever questionable venture David had concocted. What exactly did he invest in? I asked, struggling to keep my voice steady. A development project in Florida. He said it was guaranteed returns. But she twisted her gloves in her hands. The developer filed for bankruptcy last month. And there it was. The real reason for their desperate attempt to sell the beach house, for David's aggressive response to the audit threat. They weren't just living beyond their means, they were trying to cover up a massive financial disaster. I pulled out my phone to call Thomas, but Rachel grabbed my arm. Please, she begged. Don't call him yet. David doesn't know I'm telling you this. He thinks we can still fix it. Fix it? Rachel, this is embezzlement. You took protected estate funds and lost them in a bad investment. There's no fixing that. I know. She burst into tears, real ones this time, not her usual calculated display. I know I messed up. Everything's falling apart, and I don't know what to do. I looked at my sister, really looked at her. Behind the designer facade and society manners, she was terrified. For the first time, I saw what Grandma must have seen. A woman so desperate to prove her worth that she'd lost sight of what actually mattered. First, I said, standing up, we need to understand exactly what happened. Get your keys. We're going to see David. The drive to their Providence house was tense. Rachel kept starting to speak, then stopping herself. When we pulled up to their colonial-style home, David's car was in the driveway. Let me do the talking, I said as we approached the door. David's face when he opened it said everything. Rachel, what did you do? What she should have done months ago, I replied, pushing past him into their immaculate foyer. Start talking, David. Everything about this Florida development. What emerged over the next 2 hours was a tale of increasingly desperate financial moves. David had leveraged their house to invest in the development, convinced it would solve all their money problems. When that started to go south, he pressured Rachel to use estate funds to cover their mounting debts. It wasn't supposed to happen like this, he insisted, pacing their living room. The developer had a solid track record. Had being the operative word, I noted, reviewing the documents he reluctantly provided. Did you do any actual due diligence before investing? His silence was damning. I turned to Rachel, who sat small and quiet on their expensive couch. This is why you tried to sell the beach house, isn't it? To cover this mess before anyone found out. She nodded miserably. The developer was demanding more capital. David said if we couldn't provide it, we'd lose everything we'd already invested. I panicked. I thought of Grandma's words about thinking 5 moves ahead. She must have seen this coming. Rachel's susceptibility to David's schemes, his financial recklessness, the inevitable crash. My phone buzzed. Thomas again. This time I answered. Emma, he said urgently, we need to talk about the Florida situation. I sat up straighter. How did you? Your grandmother, he interrupted, left very specific instructions about unauthorized investments, including a separate insurance policy designed to protect against exactly this type of situation. Hope flickered faintly. What kind of insurance policy? A rather substantial one. She knew Rachel might be tempted to invest estate funds unwisely. The policy covers losses up to $1 million, specifically in cases of unauthorized investment or misappropriation. I closed my eyes, overwhelmed by yet another example of Grandma's foresight. Can you come to David and Rachel's house? We need to handle this now. An hour later, we all sat around their dining room table. Me, Rachel, David, and Thomas, who'd brought a thick folder of documents. The insurance claim will cover the lost investment, Thomas explained, but there are conditions. Of course there are, David muttered. Thomas ignored him. First, both Rachel and David must sign agreements acknowledging their responsibility for the unauthorized investment. Second, they'll need to attend financial management counseling. The estate will cover this cost. Third, he looked directly at David. You'll need to step down from any involvement with estate matters, formally and permanently. And if we refuse, David challenged, then Emma will have no choice but to pursue legal action for the recovery of misappropriated funds. Given the documentation we have, that would likely result in criminal charges. The room fell silent. Rachel reached for David's hand, but he pulled away, standing up abruptly. I need some air, he announced, and walked out the front door. Rachel watched him go, then turned to me with tears in her eyes. What happens now? Now, I said gently, we do what Grandma would want. We fix what's broken, not just the beach house, but our family too. But Rachel, this only works if you're truly ready to change. She nodded slowly. The counseling. Will you come with me? Not because you have to, but because we're sisters, I finished. Yes, I'll come. Over the next few months, a new pattern emerged. Rachel and I spent weekends at the beach house, slowly bringing it back to life. She threw herself into the restoration with surprising enthusiasm, particularly the garden. Sometimes I caught glimpses of the sister I remembered from childhood, before status and appearances became her whole world. David filed for divorce in the fall. Rachel was devastated but not surprised. He never loved me, she confided one evening as we sat on the newly repaired porch. He loved what I represented, access to Grandma's money, social connections. When that fell apart, his loss, I said firmly, you're worth more than that. The insurance claim protected the estate, and Rachel stuck with her counseling. She even started working part-time at a local garden center, discovering a real talent for landscape design. 1 year later, we held a small ceremony in the restored garden, dedicating a bench in Grandma's honor. As Rachel spoke, her voice steady and clear, I knew Grandma would be proud. Not just of the beach house, but of the family she'd left behind, finally finding their way back to what truly mattered.